Cindy met and fell in love with Rick Thomas during her freshman year of college. He was funny, energetic, and made her laugh like no one else. He thought of funny ways to surprise her and always seemed to know the best way to show that he cared about her. Sometimes they would just take long walks on Sunday afternoons or sneak into one of the empty academic buildings on campus where they would sit and talk for hours. He was handsome and kind, which was a rare combination in college. Her parents adored him, and at first sight his family was in love with her too. Rick's sister Kathy once half-jokingly said, "If he ever breaks up with you, we'll definitely miss him." By the middle of his last semester, Rick had landed a job with a large investment firm on the West Coast. Cindy got her teaching degree and began looking for a job in Orange County, not far from Rick's job in Anaheim. She was hired by the local school district to teach 7th grade math. To celebrate getting her new job, Rick took her out to dinner in San Clemente overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Before dessert, he got down on one knee and asked for her hand. The ring, as befitted Rick, was gorgeous, just under 2 carats, in a gold setting that had belonged to his paternal grandmother. Cindy cried with happiness, hugged Rick as tightly as she could, and whispered in his ear, "Yes, yes, forever yes," and the people around them broke into applause. 9 years passed. Cindy was 32 years old and the mother of twins, Michael and Sarah. They were 6 years old each. Cindy continued to teach but was tired of the low pay and long hours. Although she enjoyed some aspects of the job, being away from her family and putting up with idiot parents convinced her that enough was enough. Both she and Rick were good with finances, so Cindy was able to leave her teaching job even if it took her a year to get back on her feet. It only took 5 months, and it happened by coincidence. Cindy kept in touch with her best friend from college, Kelly. They met freshman year and hit it off right away. They ended up living in the same room all 4 years. After college, they lived together during Cindy's 9-month engagement to Rick. If Cindy was fun and adventurous, Kelly was a hurricane. It was hard to say that Kelly was a risk-taker because Kelly didn't seem to know the meaning of the word. Along with her free spirit, Kelly was devoid of any sense of planning or long-term thinking. She enjoyed the moment and rarely, if ever, thought, "Maybe I should stop and think about how this might turn out." Kelly's DNA, without any look before you leap, led them to many adventures. Luckily for Kelly, she had Cindy to support her and look out for her. More than once, Cindy steered Kelly away from potential disaster. Kelly would then erupt in anger and later thank Cindy for being her favorite and needed friend. And on one such occasion, Cindy was there to pull Kelly out of the fire if necessary and, as it turned out, inadvertently set her career on a new course. It was late January when Kelly called Cindy and asked her to be her date for a wedding coming up in 3 weeks. Kelly's boss was getting married in Napa, and she was invited to the celebration. She was eager to have fun and see what adventures might ensue. But she had matured emotionally and realized it would be best to have her loved one by her side. "This is going to be so much fun, Cindy," Kelly said, pleading with her mate. "Lots of wine, dancing, and a bunch of cute young professionals. Married to the twins' sister." Cindy's nickname for Kelly. "Who's so much fun for?" "Oh, don't be a prude," Kelly replied. "Let your gorgeous blonde hair down a little. A little fun away from Rick and the kids might spur you on a little." "Thanks, sis. How about we take him with us?" "Sorry, girlfriend, but the invitation says guest, not guests," Kelly replied, wondering why her friend couldn't be a little more relaxed now and then. Cindy ended their conversation, promising to check with Rick and call her back. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Cindy broached the subject with her husband. His answer didn't surprise her. "Better go and watch her, Cinderella. I'm sure it'll be fun. Maybe you can stop by Froggy's Leap and buy us a case of their 16 cabs." When she asked about the kids, Rick said, "I wanted to see Mom and Dad. It's been 4 months since our last visit, so I'm sure they won't miss the opportunity to spend a long weekend with the grandkids. Take care of your friend and enjoy the weekend without the twins, babe." She marveled that she had married such a good-natured and generous man. 3 weeks later, a slightly upset Cindy was sitting at a table in one of Napa's nice wineries. She watched Kelly dancing with one of the groomsmen, who was probably about 8 years younger. Keeping her eyes on her exuberant friend, Cindy chatted with one of the bride's cousins. They exchanged opinions about weddings and noted that this one started late and was generally disorganized. Sally, the cousin, remarked, "Someone could have done a great job if they were a great event coordinator." That got Cindy thinking, and at the same time thinking about how to wrestle Kelly away from her 22-year-old dance partner, who clearly wanted more than just salsa. It took about 6 months to organize, but eventually, Cindy started a new career by starting her own event management business, We Plan, You Play. She was an organizer by nature. Her lesson plans and lesson delivery were always impeccable, so organizing weddings, reunions, business meetings, and any other events went smoothly. She researched several good companies, did all the research necessary to find the right niche, and embarked on her new hobby with tireless zeal. After 2 years in business, she began to thrive on small weddings, especially destination weddings on the beautiful California coast. It was then that she met Bennett Davis. Bennett owned and operated 3 upscale boutique hotels, each perfect for destination weddings. San Diego, Santa Barbara, and the Monterey Peninsula were home to one of his hotels, and things were going well for him. He worked hard, had a great staff that he paid well and demanded excellence from. At 26, he used everything he had, and even a little more, truth be told, to buy a dilapidated 90-year-old mansion in Santa Barbara. He had enough money and enough guts to open it on time and barely under budget. For the first 2 years, he worked 100-plus hours 7 days a week. He nearly failed simply because word of mouth, even if it was useful, spread agonizingly slowly. However, by the 3rd year, he broke even, and by the 4th year, he began to make a profit. 3 years later, he opened a store in San Diego, and 2 more years later, he opened a store in Monterey. 14 years later, he was still taking his business seriously, working long and hard, but was known for having a good time, especially if it included fine wines, dancing, and the opposite sex. According to the women who knew him well, Davis was a CBNA, a hardened bachelor, but not an asshole. He treated people fairly and honestly, even when he let potential women know he wasn't looking for a long-term relationship. At 40, he was comfortable in his own skin and was very happy with the life he had built for himself. And so about 16 months before the crisis moment, Cindy Davis Bennett was walking with his manager, Lori Templeton, through the Los Angeles Convention Center on South Figueroa for a meeting of hospitality industry suppliers. At the end of the third aisle, not noticing nothing of interest, they stumbled upon Cindy Thomas and her We Plan You Pay exhibit. Bennett would later tell Cindy privately that he was impressed with her presentation, but it was her bright blue eyes that caught his attention, hinting at a deeply mischievous personality. She later admitted, only to him, that she did a very, very subtle double take when she noticed him because, in her words, he was gorgeous but didn't look like an asshole. They struck up a conversation that lasted 45 minutes. He was professional, but the connection between them was instantaneous. He asked tough questions. What was her track record? Who were the key people on her staff? How did she interact with the company's leadership? What was the worst event for her and why? The best and why? How did she determine her overhead and profit margin? He also had time to ask a few random but somewhat personal questions. What is your favorite wine? Do you know how to dance? The beach or the mountains? He noticed her wedding ring, but simply enjoyed the companionship while he decided if he wanted to do business with this person. For her part, she answered his questions with enthusiasm. She could tell he knew his business, but didn't seem to take himself too seriously. She also liked his more personal approach. Pinot Noir only from the Willamette Valley and preferably 2014. Specifically, Evening Land La Source from Eola Amity Hills. I can waltz if I have to, but Carlton, Twist and Tango are my favorites, but only with my husband. Mountains in the summer, any quiet beach in the summer? She smiled, but decided not to ask any questions about him. Lori Templeton took it all in with a wry chuckle. She knew when her boss was genuinely interested in someone. He was very polite and friendly to everyone he met, but he had a way of leaning in slightly when he really wanted to engage the person he was talking to. When they had finished talking and exchanged all the necessary information, Bennett said, "Mrs. Templeton and I are going to have dinner at the Fogo de Chao in a couple of hours. Would you like to join us?" Lori noticed that he used her formal name, which didn't happen to him very often, and assumed he wanted to make sure Cindy knew his intentions weren't inappropriate. Cindy brushed him off, noting that she was heading home to see Rick and the twins before going to bed when she put the display away. However, she also mentioned her desire to visit them and wondered if it would be possible to do so in the next couple weeks. By the time they were done, it was decided that she would visit his original location in Santa Barbara, his favorite of the three, the following week after Wednesday for lunch and a tour. Lori and Cindy exchanged numbers. Cindy shook hands with both of them and ended the initial socializing. As they left, Lori kept looking at Bennett. He could feel her gaze. "What?" he asked as innocently as possible. "I suppose you saw the ring on her left hand." "Well, a guy can flirt now and then, can't he?" he replied, feigning offense. She didn't look at him, but replied knowingly, "Oh, is that what it was?" Cindy's on-site visit couldn't have gone any better. She had arranged to meet Bennett and Lori for lunch. It was only 120 miles from their home in Orange County to the meeting place, but Cindy had budgeted 4 hours for the drive. She'd managed to fit in 3, so that left her with a little time to stop by the old mission, which was less than 15 minutes away. Always attentive to the time, she arrived at 11:45. The Chamberlain opened the door for her, smiled warmly, and said, "Welcome to the Winfield Scott Hotel, Mrs. Thomas." She was encouraged that her hosts could be as nice as they claimed to be. As she climbed the short stairs to the hotel lobby, she looked up and saw Bennett Davis dressed in pressed khaki pants and a clean dark blue shirt from MJ Bale. His loafers and belt were of fine Italian leather. The clothes further emphasized his masculine facial features. The dark blue color emphasized his dark hair and even darker brown eyes. Cindy rarely paid attention to other men except Rick. She wasn't a prude or naive. She just had a man she thought was gorgeous, so most others didn't compare. Bennett was in the same league in the looks department, maybe even a notch higher, and it took her by surprise. She also noticed that he didn't have Lori by his side. "I'm really glad you could make it, Cindy. I can't wait to show you around the place and think about how a partnership could be beneficial to both of us," Bennett exclaimed, extending his hand in greeting. "Thank you, Bennett. At first glance, the place looks beautiful," Cindy replied, accepting his hand with a warm smile. Perhaps neither of them realized it yet, but the connection they felt when they met in Los Angeles was genuine. They both respected hard work and success. Neither of them were pretentious or cared about people who were full of themselves. They both strived to be the best they were capable of, and neither of them was dragged down by their looks. Cindy had chosen a light but relatively modest sleeveless black Tory Burch sundress and a pastel-colored linen scarf that accentuated her bright blue eyes. The dress was slightly shorter than her knee, allowing her long legs to show off as best as possible. Her Stuart Weitzman sandals were comfortable yet stylish, and the heel was high enough to bring her height closer to 5 feet 8 inches. Cindy was pragmatic. She knew that men like Bennett valued a woman's looks, and that never hurt when running a business. However, she was, as her friend said, innocent as a dove, but cunning as a fox. She took Bennett's outstretched hand and immediately began asking questions about the property as they glided through the hotel lobby. Every employee seemed to know her name, and when they sat down at the patio table to eat lunch, a small vase of California wildflowers stood in the center. Lavender, dark red, and bright white colors stood out very vividly against a white linen and Pacific blue background. Not surprisingly, there was also a bottle of the Pinot Noir wine that Cindy had mentioned during their first meeting. Pulling out a chair, Bennett thought, "This guy is really good, and I'm going to have to be on my guard not to be fooled." For a few minutes, they chatted about the road, the recent forest fires, and the gorgeous view of the ocean. 10 minutes later, Lori appeared from around the corner, smiling and carrying a small folder for the business portion of the meeting. Cindy walked over and gave her a hug. She liked Bennett a lot, but she also genuinely liked what she knew about Lori, and was glad to see her. Over lunch, they chatted for another 45 minutes and then got down to business. Cindy limited herself to a glass and a half of wine to avoid distractions, and also to let potential partners know that she was here for work, not play. After lunch, Lori excused herself, and for the next hour, Bennett gave her a top-to-bottom tour of Winfield Scott's. Cindy was no novice and did a great job. She knew that the hotel was named after a famous shipwreck that occurred in 1583 off the coast of Santa Barbara. The ship had sunk with $1.5 million worth of gold bars and she joked that perhaps Bennett's luck had something to do with the treasure hunt. He smiled, winked, and replied, "That's not the kind of treasure I'm after." They laughed and continued the tour. A little later, Lori joined them, and they went to Bennett's office to discuss their options in detail. They came to several mutually beneficial arrangements for Cindy to host weddings and family reunions at the Bennett estate, and everyone was pleased. Late in the afternoon, when all business was completed, the Bennetts pulled Cindy's white VW Passat up to the house. Lori said goodbye to him, and it was just the two of them for a short while. Bennett shook her hand firmly yet warmly, perhaps holding it a little longer than he should have, and said, "It was a pleasure to be with you today and to get to know you better. I know we can make a great business together, but I'm also glad to get to know you better as a person." He then leaned over and kissed her politely on the cheek. Cindy smiled, thanked him for a wonderful day, and said she would contact Lori about a few weddings she thought would be perfect for the venue. As she pulled into the long driveway and drove off the property, a strange feeling swept over her that took her by surprise. She realized she was feeling something for Bennett. She shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away, but the picture of Bennett standing at the top of the steps when she'd arrived, the small details he'd made perfect, wouldn't leave her alone. She was still daydreaming when she glanced in the rearview mirror before changing lanes. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a book in the back seat. It was one of Sarah's favorite books that she must have left in the car. The book, the most magnificent thing, was lying face up, and that quickly brought Cindy back to the real world. "Oh, girl," she thought, "you're spending too much time with Kelly. You're not a 16-year-old sophomore, you're a happily married woman. Get your head out of your ass." She was genuinely unhappy with herself. She was married to a wonderful man. She had two beautiful children. There was no room in her life for frivolous teenage behavior, much less flirting with someone not named Rick Thomas. After spending 20 minutes self-defeating, she turned on a podcast discussing women in business and began to disconnect. However, if she was honest with herself, she would realize that she had come too close to a dangerous line. Back at the hotel, Bennett went to his office and quickly settled a few business matters. Then he retired to his room to rest before his evening run on the beach. He stretched out on the bed. He began to think about the day gone by and, most importantly, her. She was beautiful on the outside as well as the inside. Bennett had dated several beautiful women in his life, some of them even stunning. But none of them were like Cindy. Her eyes, her personality, the way she walked, and most importantly, the look in her eyes as she walked away from him all ran through his head. She was married, damn it, but she was amazing. At the same moment, Rick was at home with Michael and Sarah, making dinner. He was thinking about Cindy too, moving around the kitchen, cooking and laughing with the kids. It was at that moment that he realized how truly blessed he was. When Cindy arrived, the table was already set and they enjoyed the meal for an hour, listening to Sarah's story about how she had found the neighbor's cat, Ralph, in their yard and played with him for a while until Mrs. Bowling came and took him home. She wondered if they should get a pet. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Cindy, perhaps wanting to assure herself that she was the only woman, made love to Rick. 6 months and 4 We Plan You Play weddings organized at Winfield Scott passed, but not without warning. Maybe it started with a casual touch on the arm, or Bennett putting his hand on her back as he opened the door in front of her. Or maybe it was the time spent together, since Bennett made it a habit to stop by her house every time Cindy had guests. Whatever the case, Cindy never shied away from his gestures, compliments, or even light flirting. Rick had only gone with her once to check out the venue, but that had been early, and Bennett was away on other business that day, so they had been told. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. Cindy and Lori had just said goodbye to the very happy mother and father of the bride after another successful wedding. The cleaners were already finishing up their work when Cindy and Lori sat down on the patio, alone enjoying a glass of Dom Perignon left over from the reception. Sure, technically they could have accidentally sneaked it from the bar into Lori's bag, which had carelessly ended up at the very back of the hotel's huge refrigerator under a box of lettuce. But mistakes like that happen. "I know it's late," Lori said, taking off both shoes that were killing her feet. "But can we talk for a minute?" "Sure," Cindy replied, copying her friend's idea and rubbing her toes. "About anything in particular?" "You know, I really enjoy working with you and consider you my friend, right?" Lori said with some concern in her voice. Cindy nodded in agreement, wondering where this was going. And I don't consider myself entitled to meddle in other people's affairs uninvited. But I need to tell you something or I'll feel like I've let you down. Do you mind? Cindy didn't answer anything, but nodded her head in agreement. You know he'll do it to you if you let him, Lori said quietly. Cindy raised an eyebrow but said nothing in response, so she continued. I love you both to bits, but I realized the first day we met in LA that you're the kind of woman that Bennett is attracted to. To put it bluntly, you are just gorgeous inside and out. You are a sexy woman with an amazing head on your shoulders, and that drives him crazy. The only reason he is not too pushy is because he respects you and your marriage. I'm not going to say that he would never destroy your marriage because that's just not true. He may not think that a bad relationship with you could be harmful if kept secret, but deep down he knows the tragic consequences it could lead to. One of the things that makes him so great in business is his ability to think 5 steps ahead when other guys are still on step 2. That's why he acts calm, no pressure. But if he decides that's what you want, he won't hesitate to get you into bed. Cindy listened intently, though she found it difficult to maintain eye contact with Lori, whose gaze wasn't accusatory or judgmental, but it wasn't soft either. Cindy, I don't see any way you can do this to Bennett and keep your life. He's not going to take you away from Rick and marry you. You're not going to divorce your husband, leave the twins, and sail off into the sunset. Bennett isn't a bore. He won't leave you and will most likely remain your friend for life. He's in love with you and incredibly loyal. It's not just about business. Although he is very impressed with that side of you, he likes the kind of person you are. But not enough to settle down. You have to ask yourself if you want a family, like you have now, or an idiot for the rest of your life. There's a 95% chance he'll ruin your marriage. Tears came to Cindy's eyes as she replied, Oh, Lori, I'm so confused. I don't know what to do. Rick is an amazing man. Even after 10 years of our marriage, we laugh easily, have serious, long conversations, and rock in bed. He supports me and challenges me in all the right ways. I can't imagine my life without him, and the thought of hurting him makes me almost nauseous. But Bennett. Her voice trailed off for a moment as she tried to find the words. He's intoxicating in a way that Rick can't be. I feel like he's dangerous, but in a good way. She paused briefly and took a couple sips of champagne. Lori gave her time to catch her breath without interfering. She wanted her new friend to wrestle with reality without saving her. Whatever decision Cindy made should be hers alone. Lori had worked up the courage to tell her the truth, but now it was time to shut up and listen. I've never in my life felt overwhelmed by someone. I fell desperately in love with Rick very quickly, but I wouldn't say I was so in love that I felt out of control. The way I feel with Bennett, I'm not in control. When he looks at me a certain way, I just melt inside. I don't know why, but I know that if the right moment came and he brought me into his bed, I would willingly give myself to him. She continued. Up until 6 months ago, I would have taken offense if anyone suggested that someone might be more desirable than my husband or that I might be having an affair. I'm not a progressive. I think all this reasoning that women should be free to walk around outside of marriage and expect their husbands to be faithful is just nonsense. Marriage is a commitment both ways. I tried to imagine Rick coming home and telling me he was with another woman, and it kills me to even think about it. So why am I being so hypocritical and playing with fire? What are you going to do? Lori asked fondly, saddened by her friend's pain. 80% I'm going to stay true to my husband and children, Cindy began. I won't quit working with you because it's too good a deal to pass up. That 80% says I can do it and not give in to the desire between my ears. But the other 20% say I can do it covertly and discreetly. They say I can let it go, get it out of my system, and then go back to how I know things should be. Honestly, I'm not so sure about that. Most days I want 80% to win. But there are times. At this point, she dropped her head in her hands and began to sob. Lori stood up and walked over to Cindy's side of the table. Putting her arms around her friend, she held her for a few moments without saying a word. Finally, she said, Well, you know the truth, you know the risks, and I really hope you make the right decision in the future. The next day, Lori walked into Bennett's office uninvited and with a somber expression on her face. She met her boss's eyes and held his gaze for a moment before she spoke. If you do this, I will quit and never work for you again. And don't think you'll be able to keep that from me, boss. I've worked beside you almost every day for the last 7 years. I'll know even if you hide it. I'll know. Without waiting for a response, she turned and almost, but not quite, slammed the door behind her, walking away. In the end, it was the perfect storm. 3 weeks after Lori had talked to Cindy and confronted Bennett, a rare event occurred. A heavy downpour that came out of nowhere hit an outdoor wedding that was almost completely ruined. Everyone rushed to help move indoors, Cindy and Lori shouting instructions to the staff as they tried to get the bride and groom into the hotel lobby. 4 hours later, well past midnight, everything that could be salvaged was done. The reception went as well as it could, and everyone dispersed to their rooms. Cindy and Bennett stood at the very end of the patio, in the shade, away from prying eyes. Bennett put his hand on Cindy's shoulder. He knew she was upset even though she couldn't control the weather. She had always strived for perfection, and that was one of the things that drew him to her. Half hugging her and looking out at the Pacific Ocean, he said, "You've done your best, partner. You can't dictate to Mother Nature, and a good time was had by all, despite the downpour. Heck, in a couple years they'll be talking about it around the Thanksgiving table and laughing for years to come." Cindy didn't pull away, but let her head lean against his chest. It felt so good to be so close, to feel safe. Cindy's 80% was starting to lose the battle. She took a deep breath, as if giving up, said nothing, turned to hug him fully, and looked into Bennett's eyes. Before leaning in to kiss her, he said, "Think about it carefully. I'm not going to force myself on you. You should want this as much as I do. If not, let's remain friends and business partners. We can always wonder what if. But if it's not 100% both ways, we have to stop right now." In the next instant, the 80% dissolved. The line was crossed, and they both made a move that in a few months would be regretted for the rest of their lives. "Take me to bed," Cindy sighed. They reached the bedroom and lay in it. Then they started talking. How would they manage to keep this a secret? What precautions would they take to keep their date out of the spotlight? He worried that she would be overcome with guilt and it would be over. She assured him that she could handle her emotions and wanted to be with him for as long as possible without arousing suspicion. After wishing him good night and good morning, she left, saying she would head home after she had gotten 4 hours of sleep. She wanted to rest before going back to her family. In fact, she wanted to sleep until noon, but knew it would arouse suspicion. He promised to walk her out when she left. Cindy crept noiselessly into her room, set her alarm clock, fell onto her bed, and was instantly asleep. Bennett took the sheets off the bed, washed them, made the bed again, and fell asleep until the morning crew arrived at exactly 6:30. What could have gone wrong? When she got home, it was the middle of Sunday afternoon. Sarah and Michael heard her pull up and barely had time to get out of the car before they immediately surrounded her, hugging her. They were almost 8 years old each and getting big. She hadn't checked in on them since lunch on Friday, but they swamped her with happy news about the past weekend. "Daddy took us to the big kiddie park yesterday, and we rode down the giant slide. Ralph is back, and Mrs. Bowling brought us cookies when she came to get him. Daddy made us Mickey Mouse pancakes for breakfast and said, maybe next week we can go to Disneyland and ride the rides. Mommy, has Daddy ever taken you on any rides?" The last question made her wince slightly. At the mention of Daddy and rides, the rough conversations she'd had with her lover just 12 hours ago flashed through her mind. And yes, she thought as she packed her overnight bag, last night's rides had made her a little wobbly today. She mentally wrinkled her nose when she saw Rick standing in the doorway, wiping his hands with a dish towel. He was wearing Adidas shorts and one of his cycling jerseys. Damn, she thought, he looks so good, what the hell am I doing? As she set the bag down and they hugged, she said, "Hi, baby, it's been a rough wedding. I'm so glad to be home and in your arms. I hope the twins weren't too crazy. We always miss you, Cinderella, but I love spending time with the kids on the weekends, and I'm so glad you are thriving in your business. I was looking at the radar when the news was talking about the storm, and I figured you had a lot going on. Let me get you a glass of wine and rub your feet." Son of a bitch, she pondered. His favorite name for me, loving children so much, sacrificing himself so I can pursue my passion. Hell, wrong word, girl. Get it together. Now wine and foot massages. I can't lose him or this family. Later, when the kids had already gone to bed, They decided to move the wine and conversation to the hot tub. Fortunately for Cindy, Rick admitted that he was exhausted beyond belief and asked for a reprieve. She feigned slight disappointment, but immediately admitted that she was tired too. She wouldn't explain the real reason, and he didn't ask, figuring his wife would only be faithful. On Monday, Rick asked her if she wanted to go out Tuesday night. She enthusiastically said yes. Early Tuesday morning, while Cindy was still asleep, he got up and secretly packed for both of them. Before leaving for work, he left her a note. Get dressed for your Cinderella date and be ready to go by 4 p.m. Don't worry about the kids, everything is ready. At exactly 4, they hugged the kids and thanked Kelly, who was in town and asked to babysit. Then they jumped in the car and drove off. Rick drove her to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel overlooking Dana Point. When they pulled into the parking lot, Cindy was stunned. Is Kelly staying the night? Yes. I didn't bring a change of clothes. I hope you don't need too many clothes, but you have a bag in the trunk. While you were bathing the kids, Kelly double-checked it. She probably traded in what you'll wear to bed this evening. You let her get into my underwear drawer? Yes. She said it was a little out of place for a boring housewife, but she found something she thought would fit. She also said not to worry. She's taking you to the lingerie store this week. Bastard. They took a long walk on the beach, ate an amazing dinner. Around midnight, they sat on the 6th-floor balcony, looking out at the unusually docile Pacific Ocean, and talked about their lives, dreams, and futures. Rick shared the news that he was in line for partnership, which meant more money and less traveling. He even talked about the possibility of occasionally accompanying her on wedding weekends. It was dark, and they were both facing the ocean, so he couldn't see her face. If he had seen it, it might have been the first sign that something was wrong. Cindy quickly came to her senses, stood up, walked over to him and said, I'm so proud of you, Richard Michael Thomas. During a leisurely breakfast in bed, they continued their conversation from where they had left off a few hours earlier. Kid, I'm so proud of your upcoming promotion, and I'd love for you to travel with me from time to time, but I hope you don't think I should quit my business because we can afford it. Never, Rick replied. I know how much you love it, and your career is as important to me as my own. You're amazing at what you do, and I want you to take this business as far as you want to go. How the hell did I find such an amazing guy? She wondered to herself. I can't screw this up. Bennett and I need to review our plans to make sure they're airtight. Her complete lack of logic and love didn't get out of her head. There wasn't an ounce of guilt in her, only the desire to fulfill this dream. Later, she wondered how she could have been such a selfish idiot. Men have often been accused of thinking outside their own heads, but in reality, Cindy was doing just that. When she turned 30, her libido was on the rise, and she had somehow convinced herself that she could have it all and no one would get hurt. She was sure that at some point in a few years she and Bennett would break up. She knew there was a deep emotional connection between them, but Bennett would never fall completely in love, and she would never abandon her family. He would find another woman to float along, and she would enjoy a long life with a loving husband. High school years, college, marriage, and grandchildren all seemed to be in her plans. Never, even in her wildest dreams, could she have envisioned the impending tragedy. The next month, Rick was promoted to partner, she had another wedding, this time at a San Diego hotel, and had a long discussion with her lover about how to secure what they were doing. Cindy had been on birth control pills for 2 years. When she started her business, she and Rick decided that they had 2 wonderful children, and that was enough for both of them. It was late June when things started to fall apart. Bennett and Cindy were in his office in WS discussing the new terms of their agreement. Initially, Bennett had offered some bonuses if Cindy brought in more orders than expected. They could have been lovers, and their dating continued to this day, but as the mob always said, it's business, not personal. And Cindy reminded Bennett of their agreement. He complained that he'd underestimated her business acumen, but agreed to whatever was due her. At that moment, Lori appeared in the doorway. I'm glad I caught you two together. I need to talk to you both, Lori said, without waiting for an invitation to join the conversation. She lowered herself into one of the leather chairs and continued. Bennett, remember our conversation 4 months ago? I told you that if you two were going to date, I would leave. Cindy's face reflected first shock and then horror. Bennett was a better poker player and kept his composure. That you ignored that warning or simply chose sex over me was surprising, but I guess inevitable. The night of the hurricane, I was sitting on the second floor patio sipping a glass of wine when you kissed, and you, looking at Bennett, picked Cindy up, looking at her, and carried her to your bed. It was one of the saddest moments of my adult life, not just for me, but for what I deeply believe could have happened to both of you. I'm not judging, but I can't be a part of it. Cindy started to object, but Lori held up her hand, showing she wasn't done yet. Actually, I guess I am judging, I guess. I think what you're doing is short-sighted and childishly selfish. You're acting like teenagers, thinking only of your own gratification and not of the larger consequences. The following Monday, I began my search for a new job. The only reason it took so long is that I had to analyze several good offers. I'm moving to Austin, Texas in early August, and will be working for an event management company there. She then shifted her gaze to Cindy. Please remember that I warned you, Cindy. The shit may not have hit the fan yet, but don't think the Pete won't come and claim his share. I'm disappointed in you, even though I've known you for less than a year. You seem to lack common sense, not to mention fidelity to the vows you made before God, family, and friends when you married Rick. He doesn't deserve what you're doing to him. I'm going to leave your children out of this because, frankly, when I think of the damage this will do to them, it makes me want to cry. Lori concluded by addressing them both. I'm going to be professional. I won't let this affect the good years we've had, and I intend to honor my commitment. Bennett visibly flinched at those words. But please, talk to me only about work, not what you two do. Don't make excuses or make a scene. The staff here is wonderful, and I know they don't deserve to be dragged into all this. I'll tell them I just couldn't turn down the offer, and I'm sure you'll find a great replacement. As far as I'm concerned, Sharon would be a good choice, but it's your choice. Thank you for 7 wonderful years, and I wish you both success. With those words, she rose and left the room. Tears streamed down Cindy's face, and Bennett hung his head, muttering, "Screw me." For several minutes, they sat in complete silence as a light breeze blew through the open French doors. They had planned to spend the evening together and all that entailed, but that clearly wasn't going to happen. Neither of them knew what to say. Finally, Cindy rubbed her eyes. Bennett, I'm going to go home. Now is not the time to try to figure things out. I know we're both to blame, but for my part, I'm very sorry for provoking all of this. I'll call you in a few days. She got up, walked out of his office, and left the hotel. She asked the valet to take her car as she needed to get home unexpectedly. She drove back to Orange County, cried all the way, and checked into the Courtyard Marriott Hotel, using her business American Express, because Rick never looked at her once. On the way, she stopped to buy a bottle of Maker's Mark. She checked into her room and fell asleep. The first shoe dropped. Lori made good on her promise and moved to Austin about 10 days after she worked her last 2 weeks at Bennett's. He didn't discourage her or offer her more money. He knew that would only insult her. Once or twice he tried to broach the subject, but Lori didn't want to enter the conversation. You can't say anything to Bennett, was her response. Cindy wanted to call but couldn't find the words. Finally, she texted Lori. I'm sorry my actions hurt you. You warned me, but I can't let this go unaddressed. In early September, the relationship between Bennett and Cindy was a little different than usual. Perhaps they were both struggling with guilt, or maybe they were just hurt that Lori had caught them doing it. Their attraction to each other never waned, however, and by early October they were back to their old form. One Saturday night, after a late wedding, they had an unusually long evening to enjoy each other. They left WS and took Bennett's BMW M8 convertible to the coast to a secluded VRBO chalet overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Oh my God, this is gorgeous, Cindy murmured as she cuddled her stallion. Before she left, Cindy told Rick that she was exploring the Monterey neighborhood and wouldn't be home until late Sunday evening at the earliest. That was true, except she didn't tell him she would be traveling with her lover. Bennett checked out of the hotel late, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so Sunday morning they took a walk on the beach and had lunch before heading back. On the way, they stopped at Big Sur and had a glass of wine each. For the entire remaining 5-plus-hour drive south, Cindy felt so content and full of life that she marveled at her good fortune. Her business was thriving, her children were doing well, she had 2 wonderful men in her life, and she was sure that Lori's fears had been in vain. It had been 15 months since she'd met Bennett. 8 months since their illicit affair, Cindy wouldn't call it that, had begun, and everything seemed to be just fine. Her utter selfishness in betraying and lying to Rick on a regular basis had kept her down. She was so detached from reality that she thought her once-a-month flings with Bennett were good for her as a wife. She was about to find out how wrong she was. On the first weekend in December, Cindy organized a wedding at Bennett's Monterey Hotel, just east of Berwick Park. The Spanish Moss Hotel was a bit smaller than Bennett's other venues, but it was perfect for weddings of 50 people or less. The wedding at the Carlisle had 38 people, which meant two things. It was very easy for Cindy to manage the event, and not all of the hotel rooms were booked. If Bennett had looked at the reservation list, he would have noticed that Mr. Thomas had booked the Belladonna room with an ocean view, a large jetted tub, and a king-size bed with 4 posters. Mrs. Thomas was not on the list. Mr. Thomas, a new partner in his investment firm, was going to surprise his wife and join her for the weekend. He had taken care of all the details, including fresh flowers, Cindy's favorite wine chilled to perfection, and the best bath oils. Rick didn't feel that he and his wife had drifted apart, but he felt that they had lost some of their connection and intimacy. In his naivete, he had written it off to long hours of work and raising children. Now it was up to him to find out how wrong he was. Since none of the local staff had ever met Rick, he had no trouble waiting incognito until the rehearsal dinner was over and Cindy had finished her work. He had spotted Bennett twice earlier in the evening, but he was out of his sight and easily concealed. He considered calling Bennett and letting him know his plan, but he didn't know him that well and didn't want to risk him accidentally blabbing. An hour after dinner was over, with Cindy still not in the room, Rick decided to find her and surprise her. However, he didn't find her in the dining room or on the patio outside the establishment. He did, however, hear voices around the corner, and one of them unmistakably belonged to his wife. Perhaps she was discussing with one of the staff some details of tomorrow's marriage ceremony. Moments before he rounded the corner, he heard his wife say in a sultry voice, "Not here. Please wait until we get back to your room." Seconds later, Rick, unable to believe what he heard, turned the corner and was confronted with the most horrific sight of his life: his beloved wife and Bennett. They didn't notice him at first as it was completely dark, and Cindy spoke up. "Beloved, I love you so much." Cindy opened her eyes for a split second and screamed, "Rick! What?" But Bennett turned his head and immediately let go of Cindy. He stepped back as if he saw the ghost of Christmas future and his own tombstone. His dark, complex face went pale. Rick, for his part, took it all for granted and instantly realized that his life was over. He leaned against the wall, tears coming to his eyes. He felt himself continue to fall to his knees as he began to realize what was happening. Cindy walked over to him as he was on his knees shaking. "Rick, baby, please. Oh, Rick. Oh, no. What have I done?" Stunned, Rick couldn't react quickly, and Cindy hugged him for a moment as they both began to sob. Bennett, for his part, took a few steps back, putting his hands behind his head as if he had just run a long sprint and was trying to catch his breath. His eyes read horror. After a moment, Rick looked up at Cindy, who held his face in her hands. He uttered the only word that came to his mind. "Why?" Cindy started to answer, but as Rick slowly regained his emotional equilibrium, anger boiled up inside him. "No, Cindy," he said, standing up abruptly and stepping back. She was on her knees looking up at him with pleading eyes, but she couldn't get a word out. She couldn't say anything that mattered at that moment. "No, Cindy, don't talk to me. Don't say one damn word." He looked at Bennett with hatred in his eyes. "Take her to your room, you bastard. She's all yours." As he turned to leave, Cindy stood up and tried to reach for his back. He pounced on her. "Don't you dare touch me, bitch. You're the mother of my children. You were the love of my life. You were everything, and now you've ruined us. You've ruined me. Just go away with your stud and leave me alone." Cindy couldn't beat the only common sense she had shown in the last year. She let Rick go. She knew this was not the time or place to try to comfort him, explain, lie to him, or anything else. She had ripped his heart out. She could see it in his eyes. She needed to leave him alone for now. She herself was in a state of shock and wouldn't be able to utter a single meaningful word anyway. She turned to Bennett and asked him to leave her alone. Then she went back to her room, to her perfectly made bed, with spotless white sheets, pillows, and blankets. She threw herself on the bed. Cindy Thompson tried desperately to control her heartbeat and breathing. The 34-year-old wife and mother of twins was in a crisis situation that she herself had created, and she realized with horror that there was no way out of it. Rick, for his part, began to collect his thoughts and emerge from the emotional fog that was overwhelming his ability to think. He returned to his room and sat at his desk for an hour without moving. At some point, he managed to come to his senses and started thinking about what to do. He knew he wouldn't stay here a millisecond longer than necessary. But what should he do? Where to go? He decided that the best thing to do would be to head home. He wouldn't get there until 7 in the morning anyway, and he could walk into the office, which would be empty on Sunday. He could shower, shave, and put on clean clothes. By then, he would have an excuse for Mrs. Bowling about his early return. He could pretend that no one but his children were there. Before he left, he wrote Cindy a note and left it in an envelope on the table with her name on it. Cindy, I'm going home to my kids. I don't know what else to do right now, and I need time to think. To say you broke my heart and soul is like saying the Titanic gave a little leak. I'm drowning in despair, and I don't know which way to turn. When you get home, or if you do, please email me ahead of time. I plan to leave as soon as you get here. I won't talk to you or even look at you until I have time to make sense of what happened. I will tell the kids that I will have to go out of town this week for work, but Mom will be home with them. I hate the thought of leaving these precious lives with you, but now I have no other choice. Do not attempt to call, write, or contact me in any way after you let me know you are minutes away. I know I can't believe you will honor my request, but I hope you have a shred of human dignity left in your callous heart to take the first step towards our end. You already took the first step when you started having fun with your boyfriend, however long ago that was. I loved you with all my heart, mind, and soul, and you pissed it all away and left me. At this moment, I hate you with pure hatred. How the hell could you? Rick. When Bennett came out of his room an hour or so later, he found Rick gone. He also discovered the note and took it to Cindy the next morning. He was going to take it directly to her, but he didn't have the heart to tell her the horrible news, which should have been even more horrible. He cursed and blamed himself for taking their date so lightly. He had always been on guard. He should have been on guard to prevent a possible disaster, but he hadn't. And now the person he cared so much about was broken, and he was powerless to help him heal. Later, when her sobs had subsided and she had calmed down a bit, he snuck into her room and put the note on her bedside table. Then he went and stood guard at her door. Why, he didn't know, but he felt he had to do something. Cindy woke up around 6 in the morning after 3 hours of being awake and tossing and turning. She hadn't intended to sleep at all, but the emotional turmoil had exhausted her. She got up, washed her face, and peed. Coming out of the bathroom, she started crying again, and then she saw the note. Cindy was proud of herself for being strong for herself, her family, and friends. But when she looked at the envelope, she was completely confused. She already knew things were going to be bad, even horrible. And at the same time, she realized she deserved the message Rick had delivered. Quietly, with eyes full of tears, she sat down on the bed, opened the envelope, and read it. Then she collapsed to the floor again, sobbing uncontrollably. Bennett came into the room, knelt down beside her, and put his arms around her. She clung to him. In the back of her mind, she wanted to blame him, to lash out at him for seducing her. But she knew their relationship was a two-way street. She remembered the first time he had demanded that she consent or it would be over immediately. She also remembered Lori's warnings. No, Cindy realized that she was many things, including a very bad person but not a victim. She had made her choice and now she would have to live with it. No, I'm going home as soon as I can pull myself together, Bennett. I don't know what's going to happen, but I have to deal with it. I know, Cindy. I wish things were different, but I know you well enough to know that you won't run away, hide, or shift blame for your decisions. You are an amazing woman and friend. If I could take that away from you, I would. But I know I can't. Just know that I'm always here for you. Thank you, Bennett. I sincerely hope none of this hurts you. But who knows? I'll call you and let you know how things are going, but I think we should both prepare ourselves for the fact that we may never speak to each other again. He hugged her tightly, like a friend, not a lover, and simply said, I know. Then stood up and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. He asked the staff to bring her car around but leave her alone. She had a difficult family situation and was a little upset this morning. The new staff shook their heads and went about their business. The veterans weren't fools. They knew who Mr. Thomas was and what had happened. For the rest of the day, a heavy veil hung over the entire neighborhood. When Cindy was 15 minutes away from home, she texted Rick, "Any chance you can come back when the kids are asleep and we can talk? This is all my fault, but I hope we can find a way out." "Cinderella," Rick replied, "I'm ready to go. The kids have already eaten dinner. This is our last contact until I contact you, Cindy. Please honor my request." She burst into tears again, realizing that the name Cinderella would likely never come out of his mouth again. She was no longer his loving wife and best friend. She was his whore wife who had disrespected him in the most horrible way, in the arms of another man. What would happen to them all? At the end of the longest week of Cindy's life, Rick called her. She answered on the first ring. "Hi, Rick. I'm glad you called," she said with hope in her voice. His voice was steady. "Cindy, I'll be home around 5 today. I've been off work all week, somehow." He started to gasp, but before he could catch himself, there was a heavy pause. She waited. "I'll make a poker face and try to be myself around the kids. I pray I have the strength to do that for 3 hours. Then, I'll go to bed in the spare room and won't talk to you until tomorrow morning when the kids get up. I'll try to get up early so they won't notice our sleeping arrangement. Is that okay with you?" "Yes, Rick," Cindy said quietly. "As you see fit." "When do you think we can talk?" She didn't want to push too hard, but even though she knew it was all her fault, everything inside her was dying to know what was going on in his head. "Second, I've arranged with Mrs. Bowling to babysit on Sunday afternoon. We can find a secluded corner in the park to sit and talk. I think it would be best if we stayed with the kids together all Saturday afternoon because we're not sure how many more days we'll have with them, if at all." His words, "if at all," caught her off guard like a sudden punch to the stomach. The pain in his voice made her want to throw up. She'd never heard anything like that from him before. He'd always been strong, even when it was hard. But never before had it been this hard. Betrayal was a cruel master. "Okay, honey," was all she said. "Cindy," Rick replied, in a tone so even and devoid of emotion that it shook her to the core. "Please don't ever address me with affectionate words again. I'm not cute, I'm not a child, and you're certainly not my Cinderella. We are two adults caught in a horrible nightmare and we won't be able to wake up anytime soon, if at all. Don't ever utter words claiming love or affection for me again, please." He hung up without waiting for a reply. Cindy sank into a chair, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Somehow they made it through Friday's pizza and the movie, even laughing a little at Michael's description of the reasons why he thought the family should buy a dog. Saturday went the same way. They pretended everything was fine. Once or twice they thought Sarah sensed something amiss, but they redoubled their efforts and tried their best to be a loving couple in front of their children. The worst moment was when Michael called for a group hug as they walked down the beach. The dead look in Rick's eyes almost broke Cindy, even though he hugged her tightly, lying about his true emotions. Sunday morning passed over pancakes and wallowing in their pajamas. Rick announced to the children that Mom and Dad were leaving together and Mrs. Bowling would watch them after lunch. Sarah and Michael were not thrilled with the idea. They wanted to spend more time with the family, but Dad was adamant, and they ran off to their rooms to change for the rest of the day. Once they arrived at the park, they walked around for a while until they found a quiet spot off the road where there was a small picnic table. Rick sat down facing the park across from Cindy. Like him, she thought. He always wants to be able to see the people around him so he knows if he's in danger of getting into trouble. "I'd like you to speak first if you don't mind," Rick began. "I'm afraid if I speak first I won't be able to control my words. I promise I won't interrupt you, and I want you to say whatever you want to say. It's up to you how long it takes, whether it's 5 minutes or 50. It is important to me that you have time to speak. If you don't mind, please start at any time." Cindy thought for a moment. This felt like a negotiation, and in an environment like this, she never wanted to speak first. However, everything had happened through her fault, so it was only right to let Rick handle the conversation as he saw fit. "Of course," Cindy replied, trying to be supportive of his wishes. "I don't know where to begin, Rick. I've been thinking about what I should say since last Friday when—" She omitted the words. She couldn't bring herself to remember that moment and the horror pain, and utter despair she'd seen in his eyes. You deserve the truth, and I will do my best to give it to you. I've been in a physical relationship with Bennett for over 8 months now. He dropped his head on his hands, but then raised his eyes as if to say, Go on. Before I met him, I had never felt attracted to men or had an inappropriate relationship with anyone. I didn't seek him out or pursue him because there was something missing in our relationship. While I didn't pursue him, I can't say I resisted his friendship and flirting. I realized early on that while the business side of it may be awesome, for the first time in my life, I was attracted to someone other than my husband. I'm not defending him or trying to make you feel worse than you are. But the first time we were together, he stopped me before our first kiss and made me decide if we were going to move on or not. He said he didn't want to pressure me and would only continue if I wanted it as much as he did. I continued. No one forced or coerced me. No one forced me to do anything I didn't want to do. I can't yet say why I was attracted to it or what I did, but I'm not going to play the victim. Anything that happens between us will fall on my shoulders. Bub, she quickly corrected herself. I'm sorry, Rick. I want to tell you that I love you with all my heart, that this means nothing to me, and beg you to forgive me and give us a chance to heal. But now I realize that I've been hiding a part of my heart from you for the past few months. You haven't noticed any difference, at least I don't think you have. But when I was with you, a tiny part of me was somewhere else and with Bennett. If it wasn't, I never would have done what I did. I lied to you and I lied to myself. I told myself that I really did love you completely, that this would pass and everything would be okay. You would be in blissful ignorance. We would raise kids and grow old together. I think deception starts with yourself before you can deceive others. So I betrayed everything I cared about. I have no idea how this will turn out or how it will affect our children, but I know nothing good will come of it, even if our relationship can be salvaged. Finally, at least in this first conversation, I want to say how horrible I feel about what I did. Regret is not what describes my emotions. I'm not sorry that I got caught. I am devastated by what I did to the only person who has ever loved me unconditionally for what I am. Whatever happens to us, I'm going to have to dive into it with professional help. I've screwed up more than I could have ever imagined. I always thought I was a pretty good person. Perhaps too late I've discovered that I'm not. I have deep flaws that are ugly. They are mine, and no one else's. I am responsible for them. I am deeply ashamed, and I want you to know it. Rick bowed his head and cried. It was a good thing they were at a distance because emotions overwhelmed him. Joy, fulfillment, friendship, love, and mutual respect were drained from his life and replaced by despair, grief, loss, humiliation, and emptiness. He wanted to respond in anger, to yell at her and berate her, but he couldn't do it. Perhaps she would have welcomed the tirade rather than the quiet sobs that escaped his lips. And once again it hit her like a ton of bricks. How much she had taken from him. After 10 minutes, which seemed to her like 10 hours, he finally pulled himself together and spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it wasn't weak. There was confidence in it. Cindy, I don't know if this is the last time we're talking alone as husband and wife or not. I'm still trying to sort out my feelings. I appreciate you not being even more disrespectful to me by saying you love me, and it was all a mistake. Just sex, nothing more, etc. I thank you for being honest about what happened. At least I assume you're honest, but I guess in the end I'll never know. It was Cindy's turn to drop her head on her hands in despair. What he said was true, but it hurt like hell. She fought the urge to look up at him as he continued. For 8 months now, you've been entertaining Bennett behind my back once a month or more. You're right. I've been completely in the dark about your actions because I trusted you with everything. My love, my heart, my life. I know I can never trust you again. Cinderella is dead, and there is no Prince Charming to come to the rescue. I've never been hopeless in my life, and I hate the feeling, but I feel like it's the only honest, untainted emotion I recognize in my heart. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to divorce you now or anytime soon. A psychologist once said in a lecture, if you are married and have children and are thinking about divorce, go outside and throw yourself under the bus. Children deal with loss much better than the choice of abandonment that comes with divorce. This has always seemed true to me, but I never thought I would be in a situation where it would apply to me. However, The alternative of playing house for the next 11 years until the twins graduate high school and go to college is unacceptable to me. I can't bear the thought. I can't bring myself to look at you, much less pretend that we are still the same. So, some 48 hours after this disaster began, I am stuck. I am hopeless and desperate. I can't see any way forward. I'm going to talk to a psychologist this week and see what she has to offer. Cindy looked at him hopefully. As if reading her mind, Rick quickly added, I'm not doing this for you or our marriage, but for my sanity and in the hope that I can find a path that will allow me to retain a modicum of dignity and love my children. Rick paused, and Cindy asked, Where are you and I staying? Should we get a hotel or a small apartment? I want us to stay in the house for now, Rick replied. I think if I have an overnight business trip once a week to give me a break, and you go away for at least 2 work weekends next month like you usually do, I can live with that. What you do, where you go, and who you spend time with when you're gone is up to you. I'm not going to let myself take care of you right now, so if you feel better in Bennett's arms, knock yourself out. Rick, I'm not going to… Cindy started to protest. Rick made the speak to the hand sign. Please stop, Cindy. You're acting like you're talking to someone who cares about what you do, who you have fun with or don't have fun with, how you are or aren't promiscuous. The only way I'm breathing right now is to care about you like you've cared about me for the past 8 months. You didn't care about me or my life, and now I'm making the same choice with you. Maybe a psychologist can help me find a better way to protect myself, but until then, you're on your own. For the next half hour, they both sat there, crying and talking about nothing. No hands across the table, no soothing words of, we'll find a way to deal with this. Crossed arms, heads down, tears. Lori's prophetic warning had come true. The payer came when called, and the fee was more than Cindy could handle. There was no way she could have realized at that moment that he hadn't fully arrived yet. For the next month, they lived a surreal life. In front of the kids, they pretended everything was normal and fine. They went to Sarah's soccer games and Michael's karate lessons. They were convincing at parent-teacher meetings in the middle of the month. Miss Snyder never noticed anything was wrong. After the kids went to bed, things were different behind closed doors. Cindy would look pleadingly at Rick, wanting to talk, and Rick would do his best not to snap. Cindy took responsibility, perhaps unlike some wives, but that didn't negate the betrayal and humiliation Rick felt. Every week, Rick told the kids that he had a business trip with an overnight stay, that he would leave late at night and wouldn't be back until lunchtime the next day. He used this time to take a walk, think, and make a plan of how to proceed. He realized that if this continued, he would have to see a psychologist for a long time to come. Rick made partner at his firm because he was great at analytics. He knew how to evaluate the positives and negatives of investments better than most. He had a keen eye for detail, and even the slightest opportunity or risk didn't escape his attention. Now he applied that thinking to his home life, the positives and negatives of staying with Cindy. And then, how would it affect the children in the long and short term to stay together in the event of a lie, divorce, or… How will the firm take it if it all comes out? Part of why they like me was my commitment to Cindy and the family. How will finances be handled in the event of divorce, marriage, or… What will Cindy do with her business? It doesn't make sense to continue with Bennett Hotels, but does she know that? Is Cindy just sorry for what happened, or does she want something different and better in her life? Getting caught was painful, but how does she deal with who she's become and what she's done? What are my options? Is there anything other than divorce or staying together? It was the latter question that caught Rick's attention as the best possible path. There was a third option. It was radial. It would be incredibly difficult to implement, but it would probably be the best for everyone, even him. So, on the third evening of the business trip away from home, Rick sat on the terrace of the Marriott Courtyard Hotel where he was staying. He began to think over his decision from all angles and all perspectives. The planning had to be precise and the execution even better, but maybe, just maybe, 2 weeks passed. The plan was still in the formative stages, but in Rick's opinion, it was coming together well enough that he decided to have a serious conversation with Cindy. He knew it might take a couple hours, but it had to happen. He asked Mrs. Bowling to babysit and then intentionally drove with Cindy back to the park where their first conversation about her cheating had taken place. Back at the same picnic table where the whole disaster had been revealed to them, they continued their conversation. Rick began. Cindy, I know the last few weeks have been horrible for both of us. I appreciate you honoring my request to give me time to think. I want to share some things with you and then give you a chance to respond. I hope you don't mind. Cindy nodded her head affirmatively, and he continued. I don't want to repeat everything that happened, especially the night I ran into you and your boyfriend Bennett. I've already told you that I'm crushed to the core. I am not a perfect man or husband, but I have always been 100% committed to us and our children. I have never cheated on you, even when I flirted with other women. The thought that someone could replace you in my heart is unthinkable. I was overwhelmed from the first day I met you, and I thought you felt the same way. We are together. We don't need anyone else. I just always assumed we would grow old together. I was wrong about the depth of your commitment to us and that we had a chance to remain husband and wife. Cindy looked at Rick with longing in her eyes. Rick, she pleaded, I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I hope that we can somehow resolve the resentment and betrayal I've brought to our relationship. I don't want to give up on us. I want to work with all my strength and every fiber of my being to see if we can stay together. Rick looked away for a moment before answering. I know what you mean, Cindy, and I've been considering that option for us for a while now. For one thing, I think we have enough acceptance and forgiveness to stay together. At those words, Cindy felt hopeful. But, Rick continued, I've decided it's not right for me for two reasons. First, while I'm sure we can be forgiven, I don't see any way to regain your trust. Truth be told, if you told me the sky was blue and the grass was green, I wouldn't believe you. Never again will you walk out our door to work without me suspecting that you're about to meet your lover or new mistress. Never again will I be able to live with you without doubting your fidelity. Second, I will never be able to touch you as a husband touches his wife without seeing the face of the man you deliberately chose over me, over and over again. You wanted him, not me. You gave yourself to him without thinking about my love or our relationship. There's no way in the world I can look at you again and not see the reflection of Bennett Davis looking back at me. Cindy's shoulders slumped. She knew he was right and wanted to let him know she would be faithful for the rest of their lives, but she also knew she had no right to demand his trust. I want to fight for us, Rick, but don't you think we're worth fighting for? At that moment, Cindy saw what could be called rage in his eyes for the first time. When he stared at her, she physically recoiled from him. He seemed to be in control of his emotions, but there was a harsh note in his words. Fight for us. Are you going to fight for us? You want me to fight for us? What do you think I did every day when we were married? Working hard and advancing my career, that was the fight for us. Spending time with our wonderful children, that was the struggle for us. Trying to remember all the things you love and enjoy, and making sure I provide them regularly has been a struggle for us. From the little things to the big things, I've always intentionally fought for you to know that I am crazy for us to always be together. And how have you fought for us, Cindy? You did it repeatedly with Bennett Davis. I'm sorry, but I don't understand how I stopped fighting for us, Cindy. You stopped 8 months ago, and now you resent me for not wanting to accept what you did and move on as if nothing happened? Rick took a deep breath and continued, watching the tears roll from both of their eyes. I want to ask you so many questions, Cindy, but there's no point in asking someone who has lied to you for a long time. How can I trust what you say? You may be sorry, but maybe you're only saying this so you can go back to having fun with Bennett behind my back. I want to ask if you got anything out of it, but no matter what you say, I guess the most important lesson for you is how not to get caught next time. I so want to go back to those conversations we used to have when we shared our hearts with each other. But that couple no longer exists. You killed us with your cheating, lies, and betrayal. There is no going back, there is only moving forward with a better solution for all of us. I realized the other day that our night at the Ritz took place after you were with Bennett. You partied with him over the weekend and then came home and let me wine and dine the whore I thought was my faithful wife. God, how you must have laughed at me. Your little cuckold. Not realizing what a fool he was so happy to hear how proud his wife was of him. What a complete idiot I was. But no more? Cindy couldn't object to anything, only deeply regretted how terribly she had hurt the man she had professed to love with all her heart, all the days of her life. He was right. He had fought for them every day. She was the one who, by her infidelity, had spat on his love. She had been heartless to the husband she had adored only a year before. But her infatuation, lust, and selfishness had overshadowed all that. Are you going to divorce me, Rick? She finally asked when she could formulate the words. No, Cindy, I'm not going to divorce you and I'm not going to stay married to you. I'm creating a solution that I think will work for everyone. It will not come without pain and loss, but I believe it is the only acceptable solution. I promise I'll explain it to you in a few weeks. I'm not going to tell you what to do, Cindy, but I'm going to explain to you in detail my steps, my path. I'm not going to ask for your opinion on my choices because, frankly, I don't trust you to have my best interests or the best interests of our children at heart. Once you understand my decisions, you can make your own. I won't try to control you. But how will I know if you don't share that with me now? Cindy asked, genuinely confused by the direction the conversation had taken. She wanted so badly to reach out and wrap her arms around him and pull him close to her, but it looked like that was never going to happen again. Rick looked her straight in the eye with a dead calm, almost painful sense of acceptance of fate and replied, "You'll find out." They talked for a few more minutes, Cindy gently prodding Rick for vague explanations, but he didn't budge. He was sure she would figure it out when the time came. A few months ago, my friend and coworker Lori warned me that if we danced to his tune, the piper would eventually show up and demand payment. I guess she was right. Rick was surprised to learn that Lori knew what was going on and had tried to warn Cindy and Bennett. It only hurt him more. So you were warned before you had fun with Bennett, but you didn't stop? You didn't come to me to tell me about your struggle? You just carried on? Tears were already flowing freely from his eyes. Her husband was sobbing. And Cindy burst into tears again and dropped her head in her arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Rick stirred, and she thought that maybe he would come to hold her. Please, Lord, let him come and hold me, she begged in her heart. Instead, he stood up and moved toward her, folding his arms across his chest. When she raised her head, he said, "The trumpeter has come and is demanding at least partial payment. Maybe someday it will be time for full payment." 2 weeks and 4 days later, Rick left for his weekly business trip, where he had time alone to sort himself out and work through his pain. He hugged and kissed his children goodbye, and it seemed to Cindy that he was a little sadder than he had been the last few days. It must be hard for him to say goodbye even for 24 hours, she thought. Cindy was sleeping better at night because she was taking melatonin, which helped her fight nighttime sleep. Rick suggested she leave the kids overnight with Mrs. Bowling and her cat. She had become almost an aunt to the children. Rick suggested that she could get a good night's sleep after a couple glasses of wine. Cindy agreed, and Mrs. Bowling happily welcomed her young friends. It was 5:30 a.m., and her cell phone had been ringing nonstop for 3 minutes before she heard the ringing, opened it, and picked it up. The screen was flashing with the word 911 on it. "Hello," Cindy said, trying to force herself to wake up. "Is this Cindy Thomas, Richard Thomas's wife?" said the professional voice on the other end of the line. Cindy sat up sharply in bed. No one called him Richard. "Yes, that's her. Is everything all right?" "Excuse me, Mrs. Thomas, but let me clarify that you live at 918 South El Camino Court. Is that correct?" "Yes," she almost shouted into the receiver. "And can you tell me what kind of car your husband drives?" "A dark gray 2019 Lexus ES. Why? Is there something wrong?" "Mrs. Thomas, I regret to inform you that your husband was involved in an accident on California Highway 79 west of the Pacific Crest Trailhead near Warner Springs." "Oh no, my goodness," Cindy exclaimed. "Is he all right? Is he in the hospital or in an ambulance?" "I'm very sorry to inform you, Mrs. Thomas, but the accident turned out to be fatal. I don't know any other details, but his body is being transported to the University of California Medical Center in San Diego and should arrive there within the hour. I'm sorry for your loss." Cindy was stunned and for a while couldn't move or even comprehend what she had just heard. Then her head exploded at this news, and her screams would have been heard by the entire neighborhood, anyone who was awake at that hour. She cried and screamed into her pillow for the better part of an hour until she was exhausted. Finally, she began to come to her senses. She had to tell the kids, but when and how? She had to call her mom and Rick's parents in Denver. She needed a friend, but she didn't know where to turn. She needed to get to UCSDMC right away, but could she bring herself to drive? Kelly was in Europe on business, so she wouldn't be able to help for a few days, if at all. She splashed water on her face, dressed quickly, gathered her hair into a ponytail, and headed for the front door when the doorbell rang. How strange, she thought. So early. It was Brad Stanton, the family lawyer and one of Rick's best friends. He looked like someone had beaten him with a baseball bat. Cindy, I heard the news about the accident. It was just shown on the morning news. I'm so sorry. With those words, she collapsed in his arms, sobbing and shaking violently. Brad held her in the doorway for a moment. Not a moment later, Mrs. Bowling came out of the house in her bathrobe and ran across the lawn with a look of concern on her face. Cindy was unable to speak, and Brad filled the void. Mrs. Bowling cried, but immediately clung to the young woman and enclosed her in her caring arms. After a few minutes, Cindy began to slowly come to her senses and insisted on going to the hospital in San Diego. I have to see him. I have to see my Rick. Brad and Mrs. Bowling agreed that she would watch the children, quickly let them know where their mother was, and drive them to school. They would find out soon enough, but not now. Brad insisted on driving Cindy, and within 5 minutes they were on the road. Cindy's phone was bursting with calls and messages from friends. She called her mom, who said she would be on the first flight out. Cindy then had to break the news to Connor and Lily Thomas, Rick's parents. It was devastating. They too promised they would be on the first flight they could get on. They figured they would be there by the time the kids got home from school. Cindy turned off the phone, looked out at the Pacific Ocean, and started crying again. The next 5 days were a living hell, explaining to the kids that, thank goodness, Grandpa, Grandma, and Mrs. Bowling had come to the rescue. Talking to authorities, insurance companies, Cindy had 3 separate life insurance policies, arranging funerals, dealing with clients who had weddings or family functions booked. The list seemed endless. In addition, Cindy was plagued with questions. What was Rick doing an hour out of town on a deserted road in the early morning hours? Although no one used the word reckless, he was definitely speeding. The toxicology report showed that Rick had nothing but blood in his system. No alcohol, drugs, or any other substance that could have interfered with his driving. The contents of his stomach showed that he had eaten steak, salad, and potatoes the night before, but had drunk nothing but water. Cindy was stunned. Bennett, for his part, picked up the phone several times to text Cindy, but finally decided not to. He was sure that she was suffering far more than he could imagine and realized that his message would only make matters worse. Lori was in a meeting with a new client when she heard the news. Her administrative assistant, Stacy, saw the hurt and pain on her face, but she thought it was a little odd that she didn't look completely shaken. Lori did not attend the funeral. The funeral was held Friday morning and was attended by everyone who knew Rick. Cindy was shocked when she heard what people were saying about him. She knew he was an amazing man, but as one story after another was told, it became clear that her husband was one of the most loyal friends, caring coworkers, generous bosses, and respectful people many of them knew. This made her even more desperate, because she couldn't help but think that if she had been more intimate with her husband, her affair with Bennett would never have happened, and Rick would still be alive today. It was up to her to find out just how right she was. Late Sunday night, Brad showed up at the house. He spoke briefly with Cindy's mom and mother-in-law, who immediately grabbed the kids and headed out the door. When Cindy came down the stairs, she saw Brad sitting at the kitchen table, looking like a cat that had just swallowed a canary. Cindy was puzzled by his appearance and behavior. She offered him something to drink. He thanked her but declined, inviting her to sit with him. He began, "Cindy, before I convey to you what I've been instructed to convey, I have 2 things to tell you. I'm your friend, but I'm not here today as your friend, but as a representative of a client. That client is Rick." Cindy covered her mouth with her hand and gasped. "I say my client is Rick because even though he is deceased, I still act as his attorney and handle his affairs, both legal and financial. The second thing you should know without a shadow of a doubt is that I had no idea what was going to happen to Rick." Cindy found that odd. How could anyone know what would happen as a result of an accident, or even that an accident would happen? Rick understood her confusion. "Rick told me verbally and in writing that if anything happened to him, I was to honor his wishes. He paid me in full for the work, even though I offered to do it as a friend. He insisted that everything be done legally and properly. I don't know the contents of this note, but I know it is a letter from Rick to you. I was instructed to deliver it to you and leave immediately before you opened and read it. Cindy took the letter from Brad, her hands shaking violently. What else did he instruct you to do? She asked. She asked. Brad looked a little embarrassed, but replied, I'm sorry, Cindy, but this is confidential information between me and my client. Rick has strictly forbidden me to give you any information about our conversations, my duties, and his wishes. Again, I apologize. With those words, Brad got up and left without waiting for Cindy's response. Cindy opened the letter and Piper reappeared to collect some of her debt. Cindy, you already know I'm dead and the funeral is over. Brad handed you this note and left. The kids are with my parents and your mom. They know not to come home for a few hours as it will be hard for you to get over it. This is the third option, Cindy. It's the best way out I could find. I loved you with all my heart, and now that's gone. You took it away. I guess that's the best I can do. 1. You know that 2 weeks ago I bought 3 acres of land by the lake at Eagle's Nest. It was for this reason that I was driving on Highway 79 where the accident happened. The thing is, I bought the land because I was promoted and we were both making good money. It was supposed to be a surprise for you and the kids, a place where we could build and grow during the summer and long weekends. 2. Of course it's a scam. Buying real estate is a cover, but whatever you do, you have to stick to it. Insurance companies won't pay out a claim if they find anything suspicious about my death. I stopped by the new cottage on business and decided to get up early and head home. I was in a hurry because I had a meeting with a client at 9:30. So I was driving fast and lost control of the car. The insurance companies might do a little digging, but they won't find anything. Brad will take care of it if you stick to the story. 3. Regarding insurance, I changed my will in the last few weeks. 90% of my money, about $3 trillion, will go into a trust fund for the kids. They will be able to get whatever they need to pay for college and grad school if they want. The rest will go to them when they reach the age of 30 and will be split 50-50ths. Again, Brad will take care of those details when the time comes. I'm leaving you 10%, or about $300,000 to hold you over until you start working again in a month or so. I wouldn't leave you anything if my conscience allowed, but I realize you'll have to take care of the kids while you pretend to grieve for me. So there's enough for that. 4. As for our beautiful children, a while back I told you about a psychologist's advice that death is easier on children than divorce. I did some in-depth research and found several papers that indicate this is true. That's why I couldn't divorce you, Cindy. I couldn't do that to my children. I think someday they will find out the truth about everything, and then they might hate me. I hope they don't. And if they do, they will have someone to explain to them how unfair life is sometimes. I am thankful that now and for the foreseeable future, they can mourn their loss and not carry the burden of rejection that comes with divorce. 5. I can't advise you on what else to do with your life. I suppose you could go back to Bennett, but you might be interested in someone else. Whatever you do, please think of the children first and do what is best for them. They will be out of the house in 9-10 years, so maybe you can keep your lovers away until then. 6. Finally, I have one small request. When you are done with this note, burn it until there are no ashes left. If the insurance companies find it, it will ruin our children's financial future. Reread it a couple more times, but please, if I mean anything to you, burn this note. Don't worry, you'll probably hear from me again someday. Rick, Cindy cried like she had never cried before. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing and wailing, screaming Rick's name. She was crushed by the aftermath of her affair and feared it was more than she could bear. After an hour or so, she finally found the strength to sit up and reread the note 2 more times. Then she walked over to the fireplace and burned it until only a small pile of ashes remained. Piper had really come on a call. So she thought. Epilogue. 12 years have passed since that fateful day when Rick Thomas died on California Highway 79. In truth, he died the moment he saw his wife in the arms of another man who had betrayed him, betrayed them, their children, and their future. The rest is just the details of how and when. Cindy never married and always kept the secret about Rick's death. She did everything he wanted and used the $300,000 to take care of their family while they grieved. It was over a year before she went back to work. She tried to look manly, but her business consisted mostly of weddings and family reunions, and it was beyond her. She moved on to work for a business events company and made great strides in her career. As for relationships, she dated periodically but never met anyone who could compare to Rick. She also thought of herself as damaged goods, although counseling from a psychologist helped her cope, so she wondered, if she met someone and got married, would she cheat again? Michael and Sarah begged her to go on dates and try to meet someone. Dad would want you to be happy, they insisted. Yes, he always wanted me to be happy, she thought, and I used that as part of my excuse to destroy him. The pain was returning. As for Bennett, about 4 months after Rick's death, he considered that enough time had passed to send Cindy a note. According to Laurie's observations, they were no longer lovers, but Bennett remained faithful and always tried to be supportive of his girlfriend. One morning, he decided to send her a message. It read, "I'm so sorry. B." A minute later, he received a reply from her, "Me too. Goodbye." They never spoke again. Michael and Sarah had graduated from high school, were in their early 20s, and were attending college. Michael, like his mother, loved people, loved the energy that groups of people enjoying themselves could create. So he attended the University of Southern California, studying hospitality and marketing. Sarah, like her father, loved analytics. Making things work, finding solutions was what got her out of bed in the morning. She ended up going to Stanford, where she studied economics. Although they were only 8 years old when their father died, both were deeply affected by his loss. The thought of Daddy not coming home kept them going for a long time, but their mom and grandparents worked hard to help them get through the pain and start enjoying life. Each of them, in their own way, decided that the impetus for their lives would be the desire to honor their father's memory. On a warm spring morning, Cindy sat at her desk in her apartment. She was sipping a cup of hot black coffee, reviewing a new contract for an executive retreat, when the doorbell rang. When she opened the door, she was greeted by Brad Stanton. "Brad, it's been so many months," Cindy said with a smile as she reached out for a hug. "I'm so glad to see you." Brad responded to the friendly hug but was a little stiff. "Thank you, Cindy. Can I come in and talk to you?" Cindy noted that something official sounded in his voice. This wasn't just walking in and talking to a friend. "Sure, Brad. Can I offer you a cup of coffee?" "No thanks, I can only stay a couple minutes." They sat down at the kitchen table and Brad began, "Cindy, as you know, today would have been Rick's 45th birthday." Cindy flinched. She had completely forgotten that today was April 7th, Rick's birthday. She made a mental note to call the kids as soon as Brad left. "As you know, before Rick died, he changed his will and left instructions as to what he wanted done in the event of his death. Cindy, I'll be honest with you and say that I knew something was wrong. He wasn't himself, but he wouldn't tell me what was wrong. As his friend, I pressed him. As his lawyer, I had to follow his instructions. He never let me understand or know what was going on until today." Cindy's eyes widened with surprise and confusion at the same time. "What do you mean, Brad?" "Cindy, before he died, Rick wrote me a long note that he never returned. At exactly 6 o'clock this morning, there was a loud knock on my door. When I answered it, it was a courier with an envelope addressed to me. I didn't recognize the return address. It was some P.O. box in Austin, Texas. I was a little angry at being disturbed early in the morning, but curiosity took over. I went back to my office and opened it. Inside was a letter from Rick. It was typewritten and 12 single-spaced pages. Attached to the letter with a paperclip was a short note handwritten by someone named Laurie. Cindy shook with resentment, pain, and remembrance. Brad continued. The note simply said, "Please read carefully and follow the instructions." I started reading Rick's note. The first line was so quintessential. "Rick, hey buddy, get your ass out of bed. I need you to help me finish some unfinished business." Yes, I know it's 6 a.m. I told them it was exactly 6 and paid a little extra to make sure they were reliable. I won't detail the rest of the note, Cindy, but I will say that Rick told me everything. The whole 9 yards in detail. He paused briefly to let her realize what he'd said, and saw tears begin to form in her eyes. "I can't imagine how you could do that to a great guy like Rick. A guy who gave you all his love and devotion. A guy who eventually gave you his life." Brad stood up and finished his business. Handing Cindy a white envelope with her name on it, he said, "Cindy, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I will keep in touch with Michael and Sarah because they are my best friend's children. If I see you at a social gathering, I'll be polite. For his and their sake, not yours. But don't ever try to contact me in any way. Do you understand me?" Cindy could barely get a word out, but looked at Brad and replied, "Yes, I understand." With those words, he turned and walked away. But at that moment, she heard him mutter, "Selfish bloody whore." The envelope lay on the table as if hesitant to open it. She recognized the handwriting. It was Rick's. It took several minutes before she worked up the courage to open it, but she finally did. "And Cindy, it's been 12 years since the events that brought us to this morning. In my last letter to you, I mentioned that maybe someday you would hear from me again. Maybe someday the children will know what happened to us and to them. Well, today that day has come. 1. When I found out that Lori tried to talk you out of having fun with Bennett and you ignored her advice, I decided to turn to her for help. She's the only person on the planet who knew of my intentions. She begged and pleaded with me not to do it. She even said I could take the kids and come to Austin to visit her. Imagine that, a woman of real character. I wish I had met her before I laid eyes on you. Anyway, when I declined, she agreed to go along with my wishes. 2. My first request was that she keep this note until today, my 45th birthday. On that day, she was to give Brad this note along with a note for him promptly at 6 a.m. The note told Brad to read my letter and then give it to you. I had a backup plan to get this note to you no matter what, but I hope Brad and Lori are in good health and were able to help me finish the job. 3. This morning, both Michael and Sarah will receive a similar note from me outlining everything that happened 12 years ago. I haven't left anything out. Since they are adults, I believe they have a right to know the truth. The whole truth. The statute of limitations on insurance fraud in California is 4 years, so their inheritance is safe. As I mentioned in a previous email, they may hate me for this, but I'm sure Brad and Lori will help them make sense of what happened. Good luck trying to get rid of the lies you have told your children over the last 12 years. I'm sure if they want to talk to you, they will have more than a few questions. 4. If your mom and my parents are still alive, they will receive a similar note as partners in my firm. 5. As for Bennett, today's Santa Barbara News Press will publish a full-page memo about his machinations with you. It details how the two of you planned and created amazing wedding events while you were cheating on me and he was having fun with a married woman. The article ends with a plea to seek help elsewhere. I may not be able to destroy him, but I hope to make his life miserable for a while. Maybe you two can get together if you haven't already, and have some good fun to ease the pain. By the way, you are named specifically in the article, so some friends and coworkers may have questions for you as well. 6. Cindy, almost 13 years ago, I thought we were as happy and content with each other as any couple can be. It all turned out to be a lie, a tragic lie. So Cindy, you've picked a tune, enjoyed the dance, and now it's time to pay the bill in full. Rick? Moments after Cindy read Rick's note, her phone started ringing off the hook. Note: 6 months later, all 3 BD properties were sold at a great loss to the owner to an Austin-based investment group. The Templeton Group. Davis Bennett, at age 53, was financially insolvent. From the novel The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. In the end, I shall be avenged. It was a certain, settled matter, but the very certainty with which it was settled precluded the thought of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.